number 11, again in relation to the Regulatory Committee, the decision on the proposed amendments to the Property Maintenance and Nuisance Bylaw. I'll ask Linda Cooper to move the recommendations there, and I think, just trying to check who I had on the...
Yes, Kylie.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Kathy Casey, I think, was also on the committee, seconded by Kathy Casey. And I'll ask again Linda Cooper to introduce, and then Paul Wilson to comment if there's anything to add.
And
Councillor Cooper. And thanking Glenn Wilcox once again for participating on this panel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is panel recommendations to amend the Property Maintenance and Nuisance Bylaw. So this is about private property, not public realm. Its effects on the public realm. So this report represents bylaw panel recommendations on public feedback, local board views on the proposal to amend the Property Maintenance and Nuisance Bylaw 2015. And the governing body adopted the statement of proposal for public notification on the 23rd of September. Must be 2021 because it's not 2022 yet. And we've had public consultation from the 26th of October to the 5th of December using all available channels. There was a majority support for all three proposals. 12 local boards provided views by resolution, and our recommendations are summarised in attachment A. The panel recommendations support the proposal with the inclusion of examples of nuisance, because we found that a lot of people weren't quite sure what they could complain about and what they could not, what the bylaw didn't cover. So we thought it was best to articulate that more clearly. And we ask that the governing body approve the panel recommendations and adopt the changes. And also, I really do want to thank Councillor Casey and IMSB member Wilcox. It's a pleasure to work with them. And we have Kylie and Paul to address any questions regarding the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And Paul Wilson, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
No, thank you, Your Worship. Nothing further to add. Happy to answer any questions.
Great. Well, at this stage, I have no questions. I'll just give it Al Filippina's 3-second pause. Are there any comments then? And I'll gain...
Yes, Your Worship, there is a comment.
Okay, Councillor Mulholland.
Same comment as before. I'm wondering, so it's a comment, I won't phrase it as a question, but I'm wondering about the capacity and ability for us as a organisation serving the public to that we're fully resourced to enable any changes. So my concern is, do we have sufficient resource?
I'll have to take that as a comment, because we're past the question stage and obviously officials can't enter into the discussion here. But if I take Linda Cooper in reply, she might like to address that as well.
Yeah, and I guess the same response as in the earlier item. However, what we found through the consultation was that, and why we clarified the examples of nuisance and articulated them, was because we found that a lot of the complaints, people complained or had issues about things that weren't part of the bylaw. And so, and they come from an act, and Paul, you'll have to remind me which act, is it a Health Act or something, if Paul could remind me of that, that actually really dictates what those things are. And so people often feel that we should come and do something about something that we have no power over. And so that does have public dissatisfaction, but it's not something we have control over, and that is where it's tricky. And so, so I just leave that there, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Well, I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. I declare that carried. The next item on the agenda is item 12, which has been referred from the Appointments and Performance Review Committee, and that's an update on the Chief Executive's performance objectives for the financial year to 31 December 2021. I'm happy to move this recommendation. I might ask, Angela Dalton has indicated a desire to second that. Please note on the recommendations on screen I have amended the second recommendation, which was rather truncated initially and not clear, I think, in indicating the impact of the reduction of 262 employees, full-time equivalent employees, reflecting the divestment of AIMS. So I've changed that just as a clarification. This has been fairly thoroughly gone through at the APR committee, but I think I'll ask our Chief Executive, Jim Stabak, just to address the performance objectives, and you've got in front of you the paper that sets out those that have been achieved and those that have not been achieved and the reasons for that, and a lot of that relates to COVID. But I'll ask Jim if he'd like to make the initial comments, and then any follow-up comments from Shamil Sahib before we go to questions. Chief Executive Jim Stabak.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, councillors. Look, I'd like to just make a few introductory comments or context-setting comments in relation to performance for the half year to the end of December, and touch on a few key themes through that review of performance. Clearly, it was a challenging 6 months. Auckland faced over that period of 6 months of level 3 and 4 restrictions, enormous amount of disruption, of course, to our city and to our council services. That disruption, I think, has been managed well, and the cumulative impacts of the restrictions, though, continue to show through some of our latest results. Notwithstanding that, we have much to be pleased about in relation to the services that we've provided and the way that we've navigated that challenging window of time. It's obviously impacted key revenue areas, our ability to make all of the capital investments that we'd planned, delays resulting from social distancing requirements, supply chain challenges, etc. But in relation to overall performance, let me touch on a few of the key themes. Firstly, in relation to people, really pleasingly, our staff engagement score during that period of time continued to improve, going from 7.5 in August of 2021 to 7.6 in November, and that continues into the first quarter of this calendar year. Underlying drivers have also largely seen an increase, especially around autonomy, social wellbeing, overall support from management and peers. We're monitoring retention, wellbeing and the work environment. In relation to health and wellbeing, that score in the engagement survey remains steady at 7.8. The wellbeing and health and safety remains a key focus for me and the leadership team of Auckland Council, as has been evidenced by the Hauora review and the plan that has been put in place in response to that review. We've also got great mechanisms now of engagement right through the organisation in relation to matters of health, safety and wellbeing, and we've established a challenger group of people, the representative across our organisation, to give us input on all of the initiatives and actions that are emerging from that. You'll also have noticed that we launched our No Excuse for Abuse campaign in the second half of last year, and that got really good traction and response as well. I want to highlight an area where, in relation to people, we obviously need some continued focus. Senior leadership gender targets is one of those. Female employees in senior leadership roles decreased by 2 in the 6 months to December. 51% of our people leaders are female, compared to 60% of our overall employee population. Similarly, with ethnicity targets, Māori, Pacifica, Asian and Middle Eastern, Latin American, African ethnicity groups at senior leadership levels remain unchanged in the 6 months to December. But clearly we want to do more, and so we've put much more rigorous processes and mechanisms in place, in particular around how we manage succession planning and development for people into leadership roles across our organisation. In relation to customer services, and customer outcomes. Customer satisfaction across a range of services remained high, including libraries at 95%, local parks 86%, community facilities 85%, leisure centres and pools 82%, waste solutions 84%. All of those results are pleasing in the context of the challenges that we faced through the second half of last year. Some satisfaction levels fell marginally as we experienced some service adjustments, but again, pleasingly, we were able to put in place service arrangements that allowed our communities to continue to access services. Trust and confidence remains steady. In the area of regulatory services, this has been a continuing area of challenge. I would note the extraordinary growth in building consent, resource consent applications, in particular over the last couple of years. To illustrate that, in the month of December 2021, we had nearly 3,000 applications for building consent, 3,000 dwellings applied for from a building consent point of view. In the same month 10 years ago, that number was less than 300. So the growth in particular in the last couple of years has been extraordinary. More importantly, the nature of applications for consent is more complex. 70% now of new dwellings in Auckland are multi-unit buildings or accommodation. So it changes the nature of the consenting work that we do. Notwithstanding that, we continue to hire in that space. We're continuing to do our very best to meet the demand. In most cases, we are. While we didn't reach our target of 85% for non-notified resource consent applications within 20 working days, we did achieve a result of 74%. Similarly, in relation to building consents, while we didn't reach our target of 82%, we achieved 77%. But really pleasingly, the percentage of customers satisfied with overall quality of building consent service delivery was 71% against a target of 65%. So we continue to work at ensuring customers are well informed of progress at prioritising applications so that we meet the customer's expectation and simplifying the processes associated with those activities. It's continuing to challenging space in the licensing and compliance areas. Volumes are significantly higher, were significantly higher through the second quarter or the last calendar quarter of last year, in particular in relation to noise, but we are managing around prioritisation of that work activity as best we can and responding to what's been effectively an increase in volume of a material nature as our communities have adapted to different ways of working, more people being at home, more noise complaints, more complaints in the community that we've had to respond to. Obviously has brought some pressure with it, but I'm pleased with the way the team has responded to that. From a financial point of view, obviously we achieved $126 million worth of cost reductions in the previous financial year. We set ourselves a target of $90 million of cost reductions in this financial year. To the end of December, we had achieved 70 million of that. Our challenge, of course, is making sure that as much as possible that is in recurring savings, and we have some challenges ahead of us in that respect, although we continue to make progress into the first half of this year. Asset recycling continues to be an area of focus as well. We have $75 million of properties that have been approved for sale and another 25 million which are in the preparation phases. Net debt increased by 106 million to help fund capital investment in line with our projections. A highlight, I think, for the second half of last year was the issuance of a 500 million euro green bond, our first offshore green bond issue. It was well received in the market, well taken up, and that's a reflection of the quality of Council's financial management. There continue to be pressures, obviously, from a demand point of view on projects and project delivery, continuing pressures on inflation, supply chain disruptions, etc. But we are managing those pressures as best we can by reprioritising and bringing focus to the areas that matter. Nearly half of my time in Auckland Council, 41% of my time in this job, has been spent at alert levels 3 or 4 or at the red traffic light setting. It's the most unique set of circumstances I think I could have imagined walking into. That said, it remains a tremendous responsibility, opportunity and privilege to lead the organisation through the challenging times that we're living through and into the next chapter. We know we share a collective desire with you to see Auckland thriving and progressing. And while there are challenges, we can also make a meaningful difference in terms of maintaining and improving the quality of life for our communities and for Aucklanders. With that, Mr Mayor, I'll pause and see if there are any additional questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Jim. You'll be pleased to know that nobody here is holding you responsible for the pandemic, notwithstanding the coincidence of your tenure with it. It's made it difficult for all of us, and yeah, you see the things that we may have accomplished with the money that we never received because of it. It's a bit of a heartbreaker. Shamil, that was a very full commentary from Jim. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that before we take questions?
No, I think that was very comprehensive, so I won't repeat that. Just to add that we have a number of ELT directors on the call as well, if there's any questions relating to their functional areas. And just also, obviously this is a mid-year review. The end of year review will be for the year ending June, will take place in September or October. So just looking ahead, that's what the schedule is.
Thank you very much for that. So let's move straight into questions. And the first question's in the name of Councillor John Watson. John.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of questions that go to the organisational culture and performance. And this might be rehashing information that the Performance Appointments Committee already know, but the people that aren't on it don't, so I'll take this opportunity to ask them. And the first one goes to those diversity targets, just really seeking a little more information as to what that translates into in numbers. So we've got a senior leadership diversity target for ethnicity. What does that translate into in terms of A, the number of people who are in the senior leadership team, and B, what number of those people are we aspiring to be? And I assume that collection of groups is taken as a collective rather than individually itemised out.
Thank you. I might ask Shamil to address that, please.
Yeah, so the senior leadership group, the senior leadership group is the top 60 to 70 of managers of Auckland Council, and the target we've got is to, that's in the detail appendix, to achieve an increase of 3 Māori employees, but this goes down to tier 4 level as well, which pulls in the next roughly 100, 120 leaders as well. So an achieve 3 Māori employees from the previous financial year, and for Pacifica an increase of 2, and for other ethnic groups an increase of 2 employees as well. So that's the target we had set for the 2022 year. And for the gender target, the target set for the enterprise leadership group, which is the top 60 I referred to earlier. And for this one, the target was to achieve an increase of 1 female employee from the previous year to maintain the 50% balance we had achieved in the prior year.
Okay, so just to follow up to that, so in terms of the ethnic diversity there, we're looking to add an additional 7 people on top of what already exists, is that right?
It's not extra staff, it's more the replacement. So from the existing total, if we have attrition and resignations or promotions, then it's replacing, looking for opportunities to replace them with, I guess, employees from these backgrounds, if it's possible.
Okay, so there's 60 or 70 people in that group you referred to, how many of them, if we're talking about the ethnic diversity, are from Maori, Pacifica, or other in total?
I'll have to come back with the exact numbers. I'm sorry, I don't have that handy with me.
Okay, all right, thanks. Just a further question, Mr. Mayor, if I might, going to the commentary on point 35 it is, and to do with the health and well-being score, which remains steady. And the scores reflect improvements, and it lists a number of things, and one of those things is freedom of opinion. Could someone please explain to me what form freedom of opinion would take within the organisation, and is that the organisation as a whole, or is it confined to certain parts of the organisation? But just a little further detail as to how that translates into this health and well-being assessment.
Okay, I'll ask Chief Executive Jim to respond to that.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Perhaps not all that obvious in language, freedom of opinion, but it's a reflection of the questions that are asked in our engagement survey. And it's in relation to how confident people feel about the ability to express their opinion freely and for it to be understood and heard, by management. And so that's kind of where it comes from. It's really a reflection of the extent to which people feel like they can safely and confidently share their perspective, and it's measured through the engagement survey.
Okay, so that's a specific question that's put to people then, Jim, is it?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay, just final question, Mr. Mayor, and it goes to point 20 and the assessment of the council reports by, I think, the New Zealand Institute for Economic Research. Those written reports, does that include agenda items?
Yes, it does. I'm looking across the room at Phil Wilson, and he tells me it does. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just curious to know. I know occasionally we have questions internally about, the quality of agenda items or reports we're receiving. Does the institute, to achieve a more informed and objective analysis, do they conduct any interviews or any research themselves with the recipients of those reports? And in this case, I'm thinking particularly of elected members as part of that assessment.
I'll ask Phil Wilson to the table to respond to that, please. Phil.
Through your worship, the survey provided does not do that routinely. We have other mechanisms for gauging elected member feedback about your satisfaction with the advice received, including written and oral advice. The sample of the reports, we make sure that there's a balanced representation of reports from across departments, from across agendas for different committees and such like. They look at quite a number to arrive at that sort of aggregate score in terms of quality.
Okay, thanks for that, Mr. Mayor. I guess I just signalled there in terms of, perhaps meaningfully assessing, in my concern in terms of the gender reports, then it's a little difficult to see how that can be done by just reading a report, and unless you're assessing the grammar and the content, as opposed to perhaps balance objectivity and things like that. So that was what was behind that questioning there. So thanks for that.
Thanks very much, Councillor. And if there's further information you wanted on that, perhaps that's something that you would like to take up offline with Phil Wilson. Councillor Greg Sayers, next question.
Thank you, Your Worship. Jim, you mentioned when you talked about the trust and competence result, you mentioned it was steady. How often do we do them? Like, when did we do the last measure, and when is the next one planned for? And what is that? What was the last measure? And what is your target in terms of that particular performance outcome?
Councillor, thank you. I might ask Shamil to explain how that mechanism works, if that's okay.
Mr. Chair, through you, Mr. Mayor. So the trust and confidence scores are done on a quarterly basis, and it obviously is a combination of factors relating to people's perception of decision-making, delivery of core services, and confidence in Auckland Council. Our scores have been in the mid to high 20s for the last 1 to 2 years, so ranges between 25 to 26%. We have not set a target for it because it has been quite volatile, and it's had factors which sometimes have been out of our control, obviously, in terms of what media reports and so on. We used to have a target for it previously, and it was a target that was set in the CE performance objectives probably 2 to 3 years ago. But when the Appointment and Performance Review Committee were resetting targets for Jim, they explicitly asked for that to be removed because it had a lot of drivers in it which were beyond the control of the chief executive. So as a result, we took that measure out, and we don't have a target for it as such.
Councillor Sayers, any supplementary question?
Yes, thank you. I can't remember what the previous target was. Do you recall what the target was before we removed it?
From memory, I think it was 35%. And that was based on, we had talked to a number of other organisations which do have that as a target, including the New Zealand Police as well. And the feedback we got was it's a measure which is very hard to shift. Even 1 percentage point shift is quite difficult to achieve, and it takes quite a long time to achieve sizable shifts in it. That's why we initially went with a target of 35%. Having said that, we were in the high teens, so 18% to 20% probably 5 years ago. So it's still a lot better than where we started when we started measuring this.
Just a supplementary from me, Shamil. You've got 3 possible answers for that. You either say yes, no, or you've got a middle category that's kind of neutral on it. What was the breakdown of the 3 categories? Do you recall? It might not be something you have at hand.
No, I don't have it handy. We can always come back with the data and provide more information on it. But you're correct. It's got those 3 categories, and what we've seen is movement in both the positive category, which is the top end, the mid-20s I referred to, but also the percentage of people who've moved into neutral as well. So we've had a drop in the percentage who are strongly negative.
Yep, thank you. That's certainly what I recalled. I'm sorry, Greg, did you have a further question you'd like to ask?
I did just perhaps pick up. I'd like to direct it to Mr. Stabbock, and it's around the removal of having a target. Now, having run in your position, having to try and improve that and not having any target to aim at, Jim, could I just get your comment around should we be putting a target back in, and how because it's quite unusual it seems to have a measure without a target to be aiming at. So I just wonder if I could just get your comment if you agree with the way that we've set it up with no target, or if you think perhaps we should review that at our next opportunity.
Councillor, my view is that having a target won't change our behaviours. Our priority is to deliver the services, to deliver outcomes that matter for our communities, to do that reliably. You know, we make a difference to the outcome of whether Aucklanders trust us or not through the reliable delivery of the services that we provide. We will continue to do that. That's what we focus on, and we measure all sorts of things in relation to service delivery and service performance that, in my view, are the things that underpin or result in Aucklanders having, more or less trust and confidence in council. Whether we have a target in and of itself or trust and confidence, I don't think will change that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. If I recall rightly, and Chris Fletcher might correct me if I'm wrong, when we removed that was because we couldn't hold the chief executive solely responsible for that criterion. It may well be that a couple of councillors at the time were behaving very badly, and that lowered trust and confidence. That's not really the responsibility of the chief executive, although I'd like to make it his responsibility. No, I'm joking. Okay, next.
I can confirm that, and when I come to my comments, I was actually going to reflect on a couple of those things.
Thanks, Councillor Chris Fletcher. Deputy Mayor Cashmore, next question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Shamil and Mr. Chief Executive, for your input. Two relatively quick questions. The first one is Council's role in this city is to deliver services. It's mowing lawns, it's parks, it's providing great facilities, PT, recreational facilities, sport parks, regional and libraries and so forth. These require people, front of office service people. We're in a very constrained environment for employment. How are we faring in that context for ability, if we have a natural churn of staff in this organisation, to replacing staff with like or better as we go forward? That's my first question.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Yes, it is a challenging environment. There's no question about that. We are seeing a bit of an increase in attrition, but it's manageable. But I expect it's going to continue to be a challenge for us for the next few years.
Thanks, and it's not just a New Zealand or Auckland phenomenon, it seems to be worldwide from what I can ascertain. The other question is, probably to Shamil, measuring performance of a chief executive in this manner is, to my opinion, a little bit arbitrary. And the best practice seems to be trend setting. So are we improving service levels? Are we improving levels of satisfaction, rather than having targets that become almost meaningless in time because of the factors that impinge upon them from outside a person's control? Are we investigating more modern and more applicable methods of performance management of our chief executive going forward as our only employee?
Deputy Mayor, so when we come to the end of year review of the performance in September, October, we have the opportunity to come back with any recommendations to refine the current set of measures and the approach. So we can look at that. In the way we do the commentary, we try and show trends to give that broader context. But I would agree. I think we need to consider potentially less number of measures, but more trend data. And also, we've tried to focus on the big 5 outcome areas that we feel the chief executive should be focusing on. And it's similar to what the public service CEOs are judged on as well. So again, when we come back with the suggested changes or refinements later in the year, we would like to test it with APR, and we can take your views into account then as well.
Thanks, Shamil. I really look forward to that, because I think it's an important piece of work, Mr. Mayor. Cheers.
Thank you. Councillor Chris Darby.
Thanks, Mayor. Shamil, I should have asked this at the Appointments Committee, so my apology, but this gives me another opportunity, of course. I'm looking at how the employment numbers the FTEs have been called out, and they were called out in the recommendation of the authors of the report that went to the Appointments Committee. But I'm very mindful of, there are 5 key areas of objectives with measures. It's quite comprehensive, exhaustive, but the authors highlighted that in recommendations. There are a lot of green scores. There's a lot of positives that that the chief executive is responsible for. I'm just a little bit concerned why just FTEs are called out in that way, and that's being even further reiterated today in the recommendations before us.
Thank you, Councillor. So I agree with you. FTE obviously is one of many measures we've got in the performance objectives. And the reason we have noted is because of the attention it probably gets in the media, and also when these come into the committee and GB conversations as well. So it sits as one of the sensitive expenditures or sensitive areas that we have in the CE performance targets, alongside things like professional services, spend and travel cost and so on. So because of its sensitive nature and the I guess the historical interest in this number, we have tried to be transparent and share how it's tracking, and that's the reason we have it noted in the report. We've also suggested that with strategic workforce planning, it's an opportunity for us to potentially look at either dropping it off as a measure, because with more confidence in the way we are forecasting our FTE numbers, we feel we can give the governing body and councillors greater visibility of forward numbers for FTEs, and that would avoid surprises and big upward movements through the year. So that's the rationale for having it noted in the report. It's been a sensitive expenditure measure which has had quite a bit of attention historically.
Yep, okay, I hear that. And just, we had a B at the appointments committee, we had a recommendation B that was voted on, and that was that we note the majority of the chief executive's performance objectives remain on track, which is a positive, but that's not showing up today as the recommendation. Can you comment on that?
Sandra, I need your help here. It's still in the main paper which has been referred, so we've still got the three. I'm presuming the original recommendation from the main paper carries as well, which notes that recommendation still as recommendation B in the report.
Have we got that sitting below? Have we?
No. Maybe if I can clarify that. What we note in this, we make the recommendations and appointments and performance review, and then we refer it to this committee to note those recommendations. So it would be kind of a duplication just to put all those recommendations back in. So in noting the report today received, it is noting the recommendation that you've just referred to, that the majority of the performance objectives remain on track. I mean, we could put it in again because we've put C in again, but I'm relaxed about it. It's simply a noting item, but if you felt really strongly about it, I wouldn't have any particular problems in putting that in the main recommendation, subject to the agreement of the seconder.
Mayor, I think it is actually helpful to put that in there, because the Chief Executive has performed strongly, which the Appointments Committee noted by resolution. There are a lot of green scores through there.
Okay, just to truncate the debate, I'm happy to do that. The seconder is happy to do that. So I'll ask Sandra to put recommendation B from the APR committee into a second recommendation. I think we'll make this recommendation B for this committee. Okay? Yep. Right. Last question is Councillor Wayne Walker.
Oh, I've got a few questions. I want to go back to the issue around trust and confidence. So we don't have a target, but correct me if I'm wrong, we're still continuing to measure trust and confidence in council. That's correct?
That is
yes,
correct.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so I just want to raise an issue that goes to this that may well be worthy of analysis, and that is that the major problem that Auckland Council has is the government reforms across housing, across matters to do.
Excuse me for interrupting, Councillor. Can I just ask you,
yes.
There's a chance for comment shortly, but if you can just direct this as a question so we can keep it tight.
That's what I'm doing.
Well, please do.
So we have a number of matters for which council has responsibility for that you would normally expect to be reflected in trust and confidence, but effectively the control mechanism is being taken away from us by the government. So the the question that I have in terms of how we analyse trust and confidence, especially around big issues that go to housing, that go to transport, that go to the 3 water reforms, the business that we have, I would suggest that there is an incredible reduction in trust and confidence in government in general.
I'm sorry, Councillor. Once again, a question starts with a question word. Can you please ask the question?
So I'm asking, I am not familiar with how we do the survey work. So my question goes to, how are we doing survey work to try and separate council out as compared to the things that government is doing to us?
Shamil, maybe that's a question to you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I was just trying to bring the presentation, the report on screen, but I don't have access to it. But from memory, it does pick up, from memory, the last set of results we got, the main driver of trust and confidence, the positive movements, were in relation to Council's COVID response. It did pick up some mention of 3 waters reform in it, but my understanding is the mentions did not have a significant impact on the score that we recorded last quarter.
Okay, thank you. The other question I've got just goes to the measures around reducing emissions. And I just have a question as to whether or not our performance is an active reflection of the situation on the ground, where our emissions are consistently going up across Auckland. And in fact, we're being taken to court by All Aboard New Zealand because of the lack of activity around transport emissions.
Shamil, is that a question to you? Or I might, hang on, I've just, somebody has rushed across the room by the name of Megan Tyler, and she may be the best person to answer that question, Councillor. Megan Tyler, if you've caught your breath, you can,
I have.
you're ready to answer it.
Clearly unfit. Kia ora, thank you. Well, there are a couple of main targets really in terms of emissions, as you all know. One is our corporate emissions themselves as an organisation. We are on track and we are reducing those. The other one we have, which is, you know, we have some responsibility as a council, but we also have a leadership, an influencing role for Auckland generally, is the 60% reduction target that we have for emissions in the region. So, Councillor Walker, you're right in terms of the overall regional emissions targets. We are not, as a city and a region, on track for that at all. But we have a role in both the investment that we make, the decisions that you make, and the influence that we have with our communities and our sector partners to make those changes, and we're working really hard to do that.
Thank you. Do you have a further question, Councillor?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. That brings questions to an end, and I'll just open it up now for comments, and the first request is from Councillor Chris Fletcher. Chris.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. I'm very pleased to speak to this, and I'm very pleased that we're allocating sufficient time in the governing body, because it's such an important part of our work and our responsibility. I enjoy having the role as Deputy Chair of the Appointments Committee, and as such, I've given at a personal level a lot of time to be able to scrutinise whether or not the performance sort of matches the objectives that we adopted back on the 24th of June in 2021. I have to say, on those 5 key areas of strategic leadership, commitment to Aucklanders, connection to Aucklanders, long-term financial sustainability and organised culture, and performance, I have been well pleased by the performance of the CEO. I'd like to really draw attention to the difficult circumstances that we've had, and one of the things I recall asking Jim during the period when we interviewed him is on that issue of visibility and leadership. And I've looked really closely at that. In fact, even yesterday, it was so pleasing to see Jim in the, I forget what it was called, the Herald Supplement Project Auckland or something. And Jim was there and he was talking up the Auckland Council. He was highly visible. He was a beacon of positivity. So I think on those things under the period of review of his performance, I've looked closely at the way he's tried to bring the family of CCOs together and the groupings that he's got of the CEOs of the CCOs, my goodness, all these acronyms. I've looked really closely at that, and I've been gratified to have the support of Shamil and Patricia Reid as well, as I've tried to make my own assessment of his performance over that time. But I think in summary, and I don't want to occupy too much time here, Jim has performed in a way that he promised during his interviews. He's getting the basic rights. He's helping guide us at a really challenging time in the world. We know that we are going to have to make some prioritizations. We know about the deficits that we're confronted with, but he is a very safe pair of hands in challenging times. I have been very pleased to see that on the assessments that I've undertaken, he has more than met with his performance those objectives. But it's certainly going to be, the next 6 months are going to be a real test again in terms of the high inflation, interest rates, supply chain, all of the things that we're familiar with. But I'm pleased to support this. And I also share Councillor Cashmore's concern, though, that I think 40 performance measures are quite a lot to be evaluating, and it would be quite good when there is an incoming council that they actually give some thought to how they can simplify that. But I want to thank Jim. I think he and his staff are performing in an excellent manner at a time that is extremely challenging.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fletcher. The good Lord only gave us 10 commandments, but Jim's got 40, so that's his plight in life. Councillor Chris Darby.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I want to acknowledge the Chief Executive. This has been a very difficult, another difficult 6 months. And in acknowledging this Chief Executive, I'm actually acknowledging all the staff, because the Chief Executive, the performance objectives and the measures and the green lights that we can see are a reflection of every person in this organisation that has pulled weight through a very difficult period. So that's what we're acknowledging here, Mr. Chief Executive. Mr. Stabak is not just you, but every person in this organisation that has helped deliver programs and projects in very trying circumstances as we've experienced. So I acknowledge that. Mayor, I just want to dwell on this a little bit of a preoccupation with the FTE numbers. I think we do need to review that. Understandably, it's sensitive and media pick up on it and they amplify it. In some way, we amplify it by highlighting it again today. But of course, and Mr. Chief Executive, I'm not suggesting you have ever done this or will ever do this. You could play those numbers. You could play those numbers by, there's no requirement to report on contractors, consultants, or anything like that, or all your temps that come and go. We're bringing in temporary staff all the time. And projects and programs are dynamic, and you need to do that in an organisation. You can't have everybody hired as an FTE. So I would prefer us to look at the budget of FTEs, contractors, consultants, temps coming and going, and have, look at the objectives and measures around that in its totality, because that's what the organisation should be looking at, rather than just those that are fully employed here and here, supposedly every day, subject to COVID, of course. So that's what I would do. And it doesn't also take into account the growth pressure in different parts of the organisation. and where you need to move resource or hire new human resource, responding to just the general population growth. You know, in some areas we've got big capital programs that have been spawned off the back of, funding stimulus, and you need to hire up to deliver those programs. So look, rather than speak at great length on that, I think it's something for the Appointments Committee to consider, is looking at not just FTE numbers, but the budget area under which your FTEs, your temps and your contractors, consultants are all hired. That would be my pick. I am aware, though, that we are doing a lot with fewer people, a lot, and we are at risk of suffering on the delivery front. And as Planning Committee Chair, I am very aware that the Chief of Strategy is pressed to put more on the work program, and many of us around this table, governing body and local boards, want more on the work program, but we just do not have the human capacity to do it. The Plans and Places team, I recall when this council came together in 2010, was a team of well over 100, I think it was about 120, 130, something like that. The Plans and Places team now is something more like 50, maybe even less. I think it's something like that. I know there's been some structural change there, but we're really stretching a lot of our people. And it does concern me that our people will only be generous for so long before they feel like, nah, it's too much, I'm moving to another organisation. Now, I know that the Chief Executive responded to the Deputy Mayor's question on that, but I think we've got to be really mindful of pushing our people too far at the moment, because there are a lot more opportunities in the employment market and the wages are higher. And a lot of Aucklanders don't know that the wages and salaries are higher for the skills that we hire here outside of this organisation. And it's not just government agencies, it's the private sector. They are hunting down our well-trained and highly skilled people here for employment in other government agencies and the private sector. And what I'm hearing is that you can't get a flight out of this country in July. There's going to be an exodus. And many companies are aware of this right now, that there are a lot of young New Zealanders, the talent that supports this country, are wanting to exit because they haven't been able to do so. And it worries me that we will see that exodus out of this organisation too. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. And next comment from Councillor Greg Sayers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I really appreciated the comments from Councillor Fletcher around Mr. Stabbock's performance and your summary around that, Councillor. I thought it was very accurate and very helpful and very positive. I'll just drill a little bit further down on one of the points that you did make around Mr. Stabbock's establishing these fortnightly meetings with the other chief executives across the group. Very pleasing to hear, and also very pleasing to hear from those chief executives how well that's working. And I'm sure as a result of that, things like public trust and confidence in the decision making of Auckland Council, which is the group, from a public's point of view, it must head us in the right direction. I don't agree with the fact that there isn't a target around the trust and confidence measure. It seems a bit ridiculous to actually have such an important measure in place without a target for the chief executive, because it's a great way to gauge the temperature of the public's opinion of overall decision making. Of course, that decision making isn't just with the chief executive. Excuse me, it's beholden upon all of us. So there should be a measure for the chief executive to achieve, and as the Mayor alluded to, that can have influence politically as well. The Mayor referred to some poor behaving councillors at the time. I don't know who they were or if he wants to name them or what that was about, I don't recall.
I was speaking hypothetically, Greg.
Yeah, okay, thank you. But the important point, I think here, Mr. Chair, is that if without a measure, how does the Chief Executive sit down and potentially have those conversations with not just his own staff, but also perhaps if there's concerns, even though hypothetical, your example, with councillors, local board members, members of the Independent Maori Statutory Board, they're all important things that would contribute towards achieving an improvement in that target. So just, I don't want to spend too much time honing in on this one, but just because it hasn't moved from the, I think we've got mentioned 26% rating, I just wonder if the target in there does act as more of an incentive to move us upwards towards something. So perhaps next term, I'm suggesting to my colleagues we should have a good look at that. I don't know what that number should be, but we should go through the debate of it. And I think I'll leave it at that, Mr. Mayor. So thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And finally, before I speak and reply, Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do shake my head, and I think I'm going to respond to that thing around bad behaviour because, there's not a lot of trust and confidence in our elected members if we have leaks of documents that are confidential. And the reason we don't know who does it, because the people do it in secret because they know they're breaching the code of conduct. And so, we can't name names, but it wouldn't be done in secret, secretly leaking if the person thought it was okay, because they know it isn't. So I think there's things like that the CEO cannot control. We all know that our staff can't manage our behaviour. So to me, trying to have a measure for the CEO is very difficult when it's very messy at times. So, that's just my comment on that. The other thing is I absolutely support Councillor Darby's comments about the blunt instrument of measuring FTEs. It's got to be much more fine-grained. Because I'm doing bylaws and so I'm hearing from the public a lot and all the local boards, and we've had notices of motion about increasing staff to meet our regulatory compliance. I know there's pressures everywhere, but we've got people saying, for goodness sake, we need more people on the ground. So we can't have those requests and then say, oh no, we've got to limit it. And I think actually looking at this in a much more fine-grained way, maybe in the units or departments is probably a better way to look at it, because then we could meet some of the public's expectations if we had it measured in that way, maybe. So I think that's really important. And the other thing is that I'm kind of surprised that we've got people saying how, really pleased with the targets being met. And this is out in the public realm anyway, because it was another leaked document, but voted against having a salary increase, but for the CEO, which was very, very small. So I find that quite alarming that people would vote against it and then say, oh, isn't it great that he's doing so well? And as a good employer, I want to reward good effort and achieving targets. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. In reply, look, I think I'm saying it on behalf of all of our councillors, a big thanks to Jim, but not only Jim, it's the team around him. I've worked in a number of public organisations, and I think that we are very well served with the quality of the staff, their professionalism and their commitment. I recall when we were doing the climate action work, getting emails at 11 or 12 at night. Now, in a way, I should go back to those individuals and say, what the hell are you doing still working at this time of night? But actually they were. They weren't getting overtime for it. They weren't asking for particular praise for it. But, when they've got an issue in front of them and there's an urgency in it, our finance team is pretty much the same. They work the long hours and they put the commitment in. And it's, I think, always worthwhile just acknowledging and thanking people for their efforts. Because I have to say that, you know, working in the public sector, maybe as an official or as an elected representative, is sometimes a thankless task. You know, the old saying is you'll always be remembered for what you got wrong and not what you got right. But our people, you know, we all make errors, we make mistakes, and we can always look at how we can improve our performance. But I think that Jim and the team that he has around him have worked hard, have shown that commitment, and I want to put on public record, I think on behalf of all of us, our thanks for that. Just a couple of issues. FTEs, it is a sensitive item, Councillor Darby. It's always asked about. If you didn't put them in, there'd be a valid question as to why not. I think the better answer, and Councillor Cooper and you both raised it, is to put it in, but put it in context. This council is serving a population that's more than 300,000 bigger than it was when it began. And our staffing hasn't gone up commensurately. We're doing more with less in terms of the people that we serve. Equally, the figure that Jim used before is just a really good one, which was, you know, we were doing 300 consents in March 2010. We were doing 3,000 in March 222. And, you know, Linda Cooper, as Chair of Regulatory, knows more than anyone else the pressure that that's put on our people. So when we only get 3/4 of the consents done within the statutory period, you have to take into account that you're dealing with a huge extra volume. You're dealing with greater complexity because they're multi-unit complexes, and you're dealing with staff that has been raided by the private sector and the government sector because they pay more. So, you know, whenever anybody tells me we've got a bloated and overpaid bureaucracy, I say, well, if it's so bloated and overpaid, why is it that we have the attrition rate of our skilled people going to other organisations? And I think we all know the answer to that. Can I just finally, I think to Councillor Sayers on the trust and confidence target, I was absolutely talking hypothetically, not about any particular councillor on this governing body behaving badly, but if you wanted a real example, let me just pose it as a question. Would you hold the Chief Executive of the Tauranga City Council responsible for the very low trust and confidence in his council? And the answer is no, because the bloody councillors can't get their act together, take the tough decisions and do the right thing. So I'm not going to put the Chief Executive up to take the heat for things that sometimes elected representatives are responsible for, and sometimes are just a product of circumstances. But anyway, look, I think this has been a good discussion. There are some really good things that have happened. I didn't make many undertakings in the last election, but I undertook to do a CCO review. I think that was worthwhile, and I want to congratulate Jim on the way that he's pulled the CCO group together to get that greater collaboration that we all knew was necessary. So I think all of those things, you know, there are a whole lot of things that are really positive here that we've achieved and that we should rightly be proud of. And, you know, I think we share with the staff the achievements as well as sometimes the need to do better, and we need to take both of those things into account. Right, before I exhaust my 5 minutes, I'm going to put this to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary,
Aye.
no.
Aye.
Right. Pause. To the contrary, no. I declare that carried, I think, unanimously. Right, item number 13, forward work